Hey, BookTube friends, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited because today I have the lovely Anne with a book, and we are here to discuss the July pick for the Black Hearts Book Club, which was the Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne. And to be honest, I did not know that A.A. Milne, of course, the creator of Winnie the Pooh, had written a mystery, and this is actually his only mystery. So I guess we'll start out, and just your overall impressions of the book. What did you think of it?
Well, going into it, I knew nothing about it, and it was published in 1922, I think. So it's right near the beginning of the era of Agatha Christie because her first book was 1917, I think. So it's very much in the middle of the golden detective era. So I had no idea going in what it would be like. I wasn't sure if it would be very different from the average Agatha Christie you read or if it would be similar, but I really liked it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Not that ratings give everything about your feelings for a book, but it has, tells you what you would rate it. But I really liked it. It was good in, I don't know, general terms.
See, John is in the chat. Hey, John. John was in the Buddy Read with us. So, what did you think of the book?
I'm pretty
Guys
sure
are
he
in the
finished
chat.
it first.
Yeah, actually, he finished it pretty quickly. And then
Yeah.
Kevin, hello, good to see you. If you guys want to contribute your thoughts, feel free to do that in the chat for sure. And Anne and I were talking before we went live, and we finished this book a few weeks ago, so it's been a while. So if we have a few missteps or bobbles over some of the details, please feel free to correct us in the chat, because some of the details we may not necessarily remember with 100% accuracy. But yeah, I agree with what you guys are all saying. You know, John gave it 4 stars as well. Hi, cool gamer. Good to see you.
Ooh,
Oh,
everyone four
resounding
stars.
4 star. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. For me, this was a perfect balance of, having a few twists and turns, but having a level of predictability that kept me in the game. Because, for some mysteries that works to kind of keep you in the dark. I think for Sherlock Holmes, it kind of works to keep you in the dark on some of those things. And then at the end, you have the big reveal. And of course, there are these minor details that you likely didn't pick up in the story, and it works for that. Um, but I think for me, if I'm reading any other mystery, I like to be able to interact with it a little bit. And I feel like this book gave kind of the perfect balance for me of that. I will say it was a bit predictable in who did it. So I don't think it's a who done it really. It's more of a why they did it and how they did it.
Yeah.
So I guess I should have a disclaimer now that we will likely have a ton of spoilers in this, because we're going to talk about the nature of the mystery and how it's solved. So if that spoils it for you, you may want to come back to this after you've read it.
Yeah. And I do agree with you that there's quite a few mysteries where when the solution is revealed, you're like, well, that came out of left field. You had no idea. And with this one, there was a lot that you could see coming, and there were a couple twists that I didn't see coming, but for the most part, you could tell what was going on, especially, by the last 50 pages, I knew the solution. So it's really nice to like have that, oh, I was able to solve it with the detective feeling.
Yes. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Mark was also in the read with us. So if you want to share your thoughts or your star rating on that, feel free to chime in. Um, One thing that was interesting about this book that I think is a little bit different than maybe an Agatha Christie is that we don't really know the victim in this book, because literally at the very beginning of the book, we have the murder. So one of our main characters, Anthony Gillingham, is, walking into this estate and this murder has just occurred. So we don't really know that much about the victim. So I think that also added to that element of fun, because you are learning about the victim and about the crime with Anthony, with the, amateur detective. You're really in it. So yeah, I'd have to agree with what you said, Anne, about that.
And it did feel like it skipped a step, because I'm used to Agatha Christie, where you meet all the characters, you're introduced to everybody, and you're like, oh, who's going to get murdered? And with
Right.
this one, you just jump right in within the first chapter. The servants hear the gunshot and something's up. So it was interesting. I agree. I like that, because I was really curious about Mark too, because the more you learn about him, the more you dislike him in a sense, because he's not exactly a upstanding, nice individual to anyone.
Yes, and I can kind of see it really worked for this book, and this was a very short book. So I don't know if maybe that's why, if he knew it was going to be a short book and he just decided to dive right into, the murder. I don't know if he pre-planned all of that, but it worked out really well, because, like you said, the more you learn about the victim, the less you like him. And we even see with Anthony, he develops towards the end, I think, a little bit of sympathy for our murderer. In my mind, I think he's sympathetic, because essentially he kind of lets him get away, gives him a heads up. Let's see, Mark said 5 stars. Found it was great fun, so much so I'm actually reading another Milne mystery at the moment. Really, Mark? I thought this was the only mystery novel that he wrote. So please let me know if there's another one, because I would also like to read another Milne. And I think that's one thing we all commented at the end. At the end, it kind of seemed like these characters may have been set up for, a series, that we might hear from Anthony Gillingham again. And I kind of liked him. He seems like a bit of a rogue. Like, I want to know a little bit more about him and what he was all about. What was there a particular character, Anne, that you liked the most?
I liked less of a specific character, but I liked the dynamic between Bill and Anthony, because they have this very like camaraderie friendship, but they're also constantly teasing each other and almost making fun of each other. So it was really interesting to see their dynamic. Yeah, a lot of the other characters I would say are not heavily developed. Um, Especially Kaylee, I would say, is rather developed. But besides that, a lot of the characters are more, they serve a position in the house, whether they're a servant or a love interest or something. They serve a certain position. So a lot of the characters outside of that, I didn't connect to that much.
Yeah, that was something I think you and I both commented on in the beginning. It was like, I don't know who these characters are. There's so many characters, and I can't really keep track of who's who. I think in my mind, obviously I had the clear distinction between like the upstairs, downstairs, like the house staff, and then of course those who ran the estate or were guests at this house. But other than that, it was kind of hard to delineate some of the characters from each other, for sure. Mark said that he's actually reading some short stories. So this was his only novel, mystery novel, but he has some short stories. And Cape Cotter said it seemed like Kaylee ran Mark's life for him. So yeah, I guess just to give a little background maybe for anyone who's watching this, essentially we have this estate owner, Mark, and his cousin. It was his cousin,
Brother.
correct? Is no. Kaylee his cousin?
Oh, Kaylee is his cousin or nephew.
Nephew. Okay. Either nephew or cousin. Some relation. Here we go. Yeah. We're off to a great start, guys. But it's either his cousin or nephew. His name is Kaylee. And he is kind of the estate manager. He's kind of the finance guy. He's the estate manager. He is Mark's go-to to run the estate and give him advice. And he's pretty much been with Mark since he was a young child. I want to say maybe 10 years old, something like that. So Mark is kind of like his benefactor, if you will. Now, at the very beginning, there is this letter from Mark's brother named Robert, who is a bit of an ne'er-do-well. He's, I guess, a man of ill repute. They've pushed him off to Australia, and all of a sudden there's this letter, and he's coming to visit. And it's on this day of the visit that this brother that no one has met in the household, none of the guests or servants, arrives, and we have a murder. And we assume, because Kaylee identifies the murder victim as being the brother Robert, we assume that the estate owner Mark has killed his brother because he came to kind of blackmail him or extort some money from him, and he's gone on the lam. He's away. What did you think about that whole deal with the brother situation? So the Mark/Robert element to this book.
Well, so the way it is introduced, so the first chapter is from the maid's perspective, and I agree with Mark made the point that domestics are given kind of a negative commentary in this book, and I do agree that a lot of the maid and the housekeeper, I believe, or the cook, they are a bit ridiculous. So I agree with that. Yeah. But so the first chapter is told from their perspective, and you don't get much information about the brother, because I think the maid lets him in, or she doesn't see him, and so a lot of stuff is happening behind the scenes that we're either told about, or we have another character tell it to another character. So it's a lot going on that we don't get. And then Antony arrives, and he has no idea who any of these people are. He only knows like one person that's at the estate. And so when he's introduced to the murder, we see from his perspective. So we just kind of follow what he's told. So I didn't know what to think about anything, because at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to take everything for fact and just kind of see where it goes. And if someone's suspicious, I'll say, well, that fact doesn't make sense or something like that. But yeah, the whole brother thing, I was always like, something's weird going on, but I didn't quite know what was going on.
Yeah, that to me, normally I don't like that sort of thing when like a character is disguised as another person, and there's this reveal. I don't know.
It was the twin.
Yeah, the evil twin or whatever. I don't really like that usually. But with this book and the way that whole thing played out, I did like it. And I was suspicious from the beginning about who the actual murder victim was. And I think a lot of people in the group were, because, Antony arrives, they find this body. Of course, Antony doesn't know anybody in the house except Bill, who he's just, happens to come visit that day of the murder, perfect timing. And, Kaylee identifies the victim as Robert. And then he proceeds to put a rag over his face, which we all kind of thought was really weird, because you have this murder victim, and obviously that would be quite a shock, and this man's first inclination was, let me get some cold water and a rag, and then he puts the rag over the face. I don't know, people do different things when they're in stressful situations. Certainly everyone reacts to trauma differently, but that was very suspicious, I think, to all of us. Yeah. And Antony, he plays it well, and I think he does this on purpose because he's suspicious of this whole brother situation. He keeps misnaming the victim. He'll say, oh, Mark, and then they'll say, no, you mean Robert, the brother. So I thought that was kind of a clue to us that, hey, something weird is going on here with the murder victim. The opening scene, it is kind of chaotic because you have all of those characters. You have all the servants kind of rushing around, and Antony arrives in the midst of this. But you also have the juxtaposition of all of that, of the scenery. of where the estate is and how it's this beautiful kind of country, um, lazy sort of afternoon where the flowers are blooming and the bees are buzzing and, everything is wonderful. What did you think of the setting and maybe different elements of the house? What did you think of that part of the story?
Well, the setting itself I loved because I love like sprawling country English estates. It's a very like Agatha Christie type feel. A place separate from almost society where people are secluded away. I love that setting for a mystery. But also, it was just strange how the house is described as almost meandering, and I was so confused as to where things were set as the mystery progresses. They explain a lot of like where the window is that they break in to get into the room, and it was just so confusing to me as to what was in the house, where everything was. So I love the setting in general of the country estate, but I also was overwhelmed with how big things were and where everything was to in relation to other things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think newer publications do a better job of that because many times they'll incorporate maps and things, that kind of show you a layout of a house. I've noticed that in some recent books, which would have been helpful because you're right. I was trying to really pay attention to where everything was, especially in the initial investigation, when they find this body and Kaylee and Anthony are going to all these rooms because I felt like something must be important here, right? That this is important, but I was so confused as to where they were. I was like, I'll never figure this out. So I just kind of enjoyed the book. I didn't take notes or anything because I think because I was kind of like you, a little bit lost as far as who everyone was and where everything was within the house, that I just kind of dropped that and figured I'm just going to enjoy this read and I'm not going to focus on whether I figure it out or not, which, actually it ended up being a kind of easy one to figure out.
Yeah.
Not one, not every detail, but it was a good one. I didn't feel tricked too bad.
Yeah, see, I was thinking it was too predictable. So my mind was going to all these crazy ideas of what it could be. So I was like, oh, it must be Anthony. He's the murderer. Or like Bill is the murderer. Because
Yeah,
I'm
I
like, it's,
remember. I remember
yeah,
you were suspicious of Bill, and then I was like,
yeah,
you know what? Maybe Anne's on to something. It might be
yeah.
Bill.
Because I was like, Kaylee is far too like obvious as the main suspect because he's the main person in the house we get to know as they are investigating the crime. So I'm like, it can't be him. He's too obvious. So it has to be someone else.
I know. I was like, I was willing to jump on that train and ride it too. I was like, yeah, yeah, Bill. It's got to be Bill. Um, One thing about Anthony, he is kind of notorious for switching jobs frequently. So we don't hear a lot about his background, but we do know that he's had a bunch of different jobs. He was a news reporter. I think he worked with a tobacconist, and he was a waiter. He was a valet. Um, do you think that experience or any of the characteristics that he had kind of made him perfect for this detective role in this book?
Well, there were two things about his character I think that made him perfect for it. One is the dramatic. He loved like following Sherlock Holmes, pretending he was Sherlock Holmes and just going with that. But the other thing is he's very observant. And that's, I've noticed, a characteristic of every great detective. You see it in Sherlock Holmes or Poirot from Agatha Christie. You see them being very observant of like nuances. And but I would say Anthony, I should say, fits the character of a detective much better than Bill fit the Watson character. So it was interesting that Anthony for me fit completely because he notices the details. He's charismatic when it comes to talking to people. So people are willing to tell him things that they wouldn't otherwise tell people because they feel comfortable with him. And he's also got that dramatic flair for being a bit over the top when it comes to picking out clues and thinking, oh, it must be this crazy explanation. But with Bill, I didn't find that with Watson's character. Bill was not a Watson at all. He was just kind of being put in that position by Antony to like play his part almost. So it was interesting, the two characters.
Mark said, I'm sure one of the servants says that she would have known Robert as Mark's brother from his appearance, meaning they looked suspiciously alike. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think it matters what the murderer was predictable. The motive wasn't so. So that was cool. Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that, Mark. I like to be able to figure something out. But John said he thought that Kaylee was a red herring. Yeah, and I think that's what Anne thought too. I mean, that's why she was coming up with these, crazy suspicions of Bill and all that, because it was just so soon. Like, it was just so soon that we were all suspicious of Kaylee, that it was, like, are we really right already? Like, have we already cracked this? Are we that good? Or is this book just that predictable? So hard to find a good balance there. But I think this book did it well. And I agree with your assessment of Antony. I think having a lot of different life experience makes you more adept at talking to different types of people and maybe discerning like what their motives are. And I've seen that in real life, for sure. Be it teachers or family members I have that are in like law enforcement. They've had a bunch of different jobs and they are better at law enforcement because they're used to talking to lots of different types of people in very approachable settings. So they're able to, de-escalate situations sometimes and get people to talk to them and open up when maybe, other people don't have that skill. So I could definitely see for Antony, doing these kind of random jobs where he would encounter a lot of different groups. If he was a valet, or a valet, he's going to encounter more of your upper class people. But if he's a newspaper reporter, he's going to be reporting probably in some bad parts of town, right? He's going to be reporting on some of that, crime and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, that was a good fit for Antony, and he was just so funny. He was so witty. He just made the book with all of the Sherlock Holmes references. And yeah, you're right. Poor Bill. Bill just got kind of thrown into the mix. He just had to play the Watson character, but it worked. And I kind of liked that Bill wasn't a great fit, because it made it surprising when he actually did succeed. Like that scene in the library where, Antony goes behind this hidden door that leads to a tunnel, a secret passage, and Kaylee comes in the middle. And so Bill has to really cover for Antony and play it really cool. And he does it. He does it. And I was so surprised because I just knew, I'm like, Bill is going to mess this up. They're going to get caught. But he played it so cool that I was like, wow, I'm getting to see a different side of Bill. Maybe he's going to rise to the occasion. So, yeah, I kind of liked that duo. Mark said, I think it fit with the story because Antony was immediately suspicious of Kaylee. So maybe we were just following Antony's line of thought throughout the whole book. Yeah, I think you're right. We are kind of following his trajectory, learning as he learns about all of the characters. I guess we've kind of answered this question. What characters did you suspect along the way, and
everyone?
Yeah, we kind of went through it all. At the very beginning, though, I did think for a second that Robert was real, this brother from Australia, which he was a real person. We find out later that he had already died in Australia, so he was already deceased. But um, I thought that he was real, and that there's there's the possibility that maybe Kaylee was in cahoots with him. Maybe they had been previously corresponding um, in order to, take out Mark and maybe split the estate or something like that. Um, what did you think? Was there a reason? I forget your reason for being suspicious of Bill. What was it that Bill did that made him suspicious?
He was just too nice. Like, I'm always suspicious of nice people. But I, like you, when we first discovered the body, I was suspicious that it was actually Robert who was the murderer, and he had murdered Mark, and that Kaylee, for some reason, may not have known that Robert was going to murder Mark, but then afterwards he wanted to cover it up. I didn't know what was going on with that, but in the initial scene, I was like, oh, maybe that's what's going on. But quickly I was like, nah, it must be Bill.
Yeah, and then, we talked a little bit about this as well, the influence of the wealthy and the upper class on how these situations are handled. These situations are handled a little bit more delicately, we'll say. And, the estate owners are a little bit more in a position to sway the investigation and kind of lead it into certain areas. So yeah, that was a thought in my mind too, that they're just going to try to cover this up. We don't know why Kaylee's trying to cover this up. Maybe just to protect the estate, maybe to protect Mark because Mark is actually the killer. But that didn't make sense to me either, because if Mark stayed, if it was self-defense and Robert was indeed the victim, he could have used his influence, right, with the police to create a logical story, a plausible story of self-defense or something, and, sweep this under the rug. That would certainly be better publicly than him going on the lam.
Yeah. And as it's proved later, the inquest is kind of ridiculous, because I think they conclude that Mark must have killed Robert. And they don't even, and this is revealed at the end, they don't even check his teeth to see if he is in fact Mark or Robert.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing that I was like, well, why didn't the investigating police even check his teeth? Because even in the 1920s, they would have not had knowledge of checking for teeth, even if they didn't have like DNA.
Right. Yeah, I was like, I thought dental records were a thing, even that, that kind of, when that came out at the end as being like one of the clues or one of the leads that Anthony followed up on. I was thinking, why didn't the police? But
Yeah.
you kind of, in these mysteries of that era, you kind of have to have incompetent police in order to make this sort of mystery work, right? Because you have to have the Sherlock Holmes character or the Anthony Gillingham character, come in and pick up the slack. John said at the end of chapter 6, I wrote in my notes that Kaylee killed both Mark and Robert. The keys were my clue. Actually, Ann and I were just talking about this before we popped on. In the beginning, John, honestly, we don't remember all of the details about the key. We did remember that Anthony used it as kind of a tool to discover if Kaylee had some sort of guilt, like if he was hiding something. And it had something to do with whether the keys to all of the rooms, including the office they were in, were hanging outside the door or not, because they were trying to figure out where these keys went. But we honestly didn't remember the details of that. We did remember that it was a clue and it was something that we had discussed in the group. But one problem was that all the other characters had alibis playing golf. Yeah, and that was the one thing that cleared Bill.
Yeah.
When we started talking about Bill, it's like, oh, well, Bill was playing golf, so he could, maybe he knew something about it, but, yeah, when did, I don't know what the date is on that, but. Interesting. Keys were kept outside doors downstairs, but inside doors upstairs. That would kind of make sense to me because the upstairs rooms would be more private rooms. So other people would not necessarily need access to those rooms, maybe. Whereas the downstairs rooms would be more common areas. So that might be an explanation. I don't know that, Kevin. I'm just totally going off of an assumption there. But yeah, I'm not sure the date on that, John. Maybe do some research on that. Look it up for us. But yeah, you would think, especially back then when, dental hygiene wasn't exactly great, you would have a lot more dental work. So a dentist, it's likely they would even just be able to take a look and say, that's my work, without even having to necessarily look up a ton of information. Let's see. What did you make of, because there were some other clues other than the keys. That was an early clue. What did you make of the collar that was in the drawer, in the empty drawer downstairs? Do you remember that one?
Oh, yes. And that was why Antony was able to figure out that it was a costume or something, because why would he remove the collar? I don't remember all the details with that one.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first read about them finding this collar, I thought that is really significant because it was just so random and it was just like all by itself that I thought this is really significant. And of course, I kind of put two and two together. I didn't really know exactly where it was leading, but I kind of put two and two together when the murder suspect Kaylee is dumping a package in the pond, and it turns out to be clothing. So I was like, well, obviously the collar must go with the clothing, but why didn't it all go together? Like, why didn't he take the collar as well? What scene in the book, because I have one in mind, what scene in the book did you think was the climax?
Oh, I would say when Antony wrote the letter to Kaylee, and then Kaylee and Antony met. I think that was the climax, because after that, everything was the resolution of like learning the truth. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that does kind of where everything peaks and you start to get all the answers. I was gonna pick the scene in the pond, in the boat, with Antony and Bill, and that whole scene was fun for me because essentially what happens is Kaylee insists that the police drag the pond. And this is literally like the next day, which was super suspicious for me because I'm like, okay, if Mark is truly missing and on the lam, like, my first thought wouldn't go to, well, he must be dead in the pond. Let's drag the pond, like that's not my first suspicion. So of course, Antony points out, well, why would you insist they drag the pond unless you want to make sure that the police have already checked it before you hide some evidence in it? So I was thinking, oh gosh, he's going to dump a body. He's going to dump a body in the pond. I think we all thought it was going to be a body. And so there's all this build up to that, right? And Bill and Antony set this trap. They are going to stay up all night. After Kaylee comes and checks in on them to make sure they're asleep, they're going to sneak out and go to the pond and wait and see what it is that he dumps. Well, I was on pins and needles for poor Bill in that bed waiting for Kaylee to come check in on him because I just know how much I love my sleep, and just the pure thought of staying awake all night was awful for me. I was just like, this is terrible, poor Bill. And for a second, it crossed my mind that Kaylee was never going to come, that Bill was just going to wait all night for nothing. Like, for a second, I thought that because it kind of went on for a little while. But, Bill does it. Kaylee comes and checks on him, and they go out and they retrieve the retrieve the clothing, which I think is another reason I liked Bill so much, is because Bill, he takes one for the team. He goes in the water. He's really the one doing the dirty work. So he's a pretty good friend to Antony, because I don't know, I don't think I would have gone for all these little adventures. Particularly when he's laying there in bed thinking, if Kaylee is indeed the murderer, what's to stop him from coming in here and killing me? So that scene for me was really suspenseful, and I feel like, the finding of the clothing, kind of clinches it that it is Kaylee. This is our murderer. Of course, we don't really find out all the details till later, but I really liked that scene.
Oh yeah, that was a great scene. I love the suspense of waiting to see, because before the scene, Antony goes through, oh, this is exactly what Kaylee is going to do. And so when you're actually going through the night, you're like, well, is Antony going to be right about all these things? And of course he is mostly right. But if like one thing went wrong differently, like how would that have changed the story? So it was an interesting scene.
And Kevin says finding out Kaylee liked the woman Mark was planning to marry was a big point too. Actually,
that's true.
When that happened, I was sure that was the only motive. I was like, okay, we found it. It's, love or money. Usually it's one of the two, and that kind of, had a little bit of both. What did you think of that whole reveal or motivation, that Kaylee was trying to protect this woman he loved from Mark?
I loved it because it actually, before that point, Kaylee is never like an evil person, but there's a lot of points earlier on in the book where you don't have a good view of him. He's obviously lying to Antony and Bill, he's hiding things, so you have a negative view about him. And then after the scene where Antony goes to see this young woman's mother, and she tells him that both Mark and Kaylee were courting her daughter and wanted to marry her. And so after we learn that, you almost feel better about Kaylee, because you think, yes, you are actually justified in maybe disliking this guy, maybe not murdering him, but at least disliking him. Whereas before that, you were like, oh yeah, Kaylee just wants his money. There's no good motive for that. So it definitely changed my opinion of Kaylee. Even though I didn't necessarily like him after that, I liked him more than I did before.
Yeah, I think that whole reveal for me, you're right. It didn't necessarily make me, love Kaylee, but we learned so much about Mark in that reveal that it made me like him so little. And that I was kind of sympathetic towards Kaylee's situation, because, in that it was revealed that Mark was an alcoholic, and he had a bit of a control issue and could be a little bit, I don't know if violent is the right word, but volatile. He showed a little bit of that with the guests. The guests in the Red House, they remarked how, any change in plan that deviated from what Mark's plan for the day was would really just kind of set him off. And, we know he didn't like to be publicly challenged or publicly humiliated, which that actually plays a huge part in the story, because, sorry, I'm outside. I got insects. That plays a huge part of the story, because he was kind of tricked by one of the house guests that was an actress, and she dressed up like this ghost that they discussed, as being on the estate, and kind of scared Mark a bit, and then he felt very embarrassed about this, and he was kind of in a rage with Kaylee about it, thinking that he wanted to get back at her somehow. And so that's what actually prompted this switcheroo. This is what led to Mark dressing up as Robert. The whole idea was to get one over on this actress. I think it was Miss Norris. Was that her name?
I don't remember.
But
Too
I
many
know
characters.
too many characters. But was, to get one over on her. So that kind of worked out for our killer, Kaylee. He used, Mark's own, vices and his own character flaws against him to kind of set up this perfect murder. And let's see. I do wish he had another name.
Too many Marks.
Yeah, it was terrible, Mark, talking about a murder victim named Mark. I was like, oh no. Yeah, not good, not good. But yeah, that was kind of interesting that, it worked out that Kaylee really invited his demise, because he's the one at the beginning of the book who offered Anthony Gillingham. I kept saying that in my head, so I would make sure not to call him Anthony, because I wanted to call him Anthony so bad, but there's no H in it in the book, so I kept saying Mark Anthony. Okay.
Yes.
But his name is just Anthony. But he invites Anthony to stay at the Red House. And so he literally invites the man to stay and kind of help out with the investigation. And so, I thought that was kind of ironic at the end, because, to me, it may have been the perfect murder, if not for the convenient entrance of Anthony.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think it could have been a perfect murder? Do you think this was something he could have gotten away with?
I mean, considering how incompetent the police were, probably. But also, I feel like he didn't necessarily want to get away with it. Because I was very confused about what he wanted. Because on one hand, he did try to create this like perfect crime. He tried to cover up that it wasn't Mark who was killed, it was his brother. But then on the other hand, you had him almost leading Anthony to solve the case. So I don't know. I wasn't sure if maybe he felt a certain sense of guilt in doing the murder, even though he didn't really want to be found. He also didn't necessarily want to get away with murder. So he was a contradiction in of himself. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Because part of me says if Anthony had not been there, I think with the incompetence of the police in the story, and Bill is definitely not equipped to solve this on his own, nor was he motivated. From the beginning, Bill kept telling Anthony, no, Kaylee's a good guy. He could not commit murder. He's not a big enough guy. I think he even made that comment before. He's not big enough to do that. So this whole idea that most people have, and I think even today, when there are actual crimes, people around the perpetrator are often shocked, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they did this. I never would have thought that they could have committed this crime. So I think that it could have been a perfect murder. And it's funny because I came across this book from another mystery book by Peter Swanson called 8 Perfect Murders. And in that book, the main character is the owner of a mystery bookstore. It's all they sell is mysteries. And he has a blog to promote his store. And one of his blog posts talks about 8 perfect murders. So he lists the 8 mystery novels he thinks include the perfect murders. And so this was one of those books. So that's why I chose it. So I think it's fitting maybe for that list. And I mentioned that too, because I'm just going to throw this out there. I've started to create the schedule for next year, for the entire year, for Black Hearts Book Club. And Anne has actually agreed to read Patricia Highsmith's, I think that's her name, Strangers on a Train with me. I forget what month we're doing it, but we're doing that one month next year.
October?
Yeah, I think you're right. October. And that is another mystery that was on this list. So that is another perfect murder. So we'll see what we think about that one. But yeah, I thought this one was, it was kind of a, almost a campy version of Agatha Christie, kind of, if that makes any sense. You know, not in a derogatory, way or anything. It was just fun. It was just light and it was fun. It was an easy read. It was the things that were problematic for me, I think, are just in all mysteries. The number of characters and trying to figure out the layout of this house and that sort of thing. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. It was very good. And I read a lot of like these classic mysteries. So the question about short story collections, I would say anything by Agatha Christie or Dorothy L. Sayers has a very similar feel to this book. And it was strange because on one hand, yes, it is a very, I guess, typical feel to a mystery of this era, but on the other hand, it also makes fun of mysteries from that era. So it was in that sense lighter than a usual mystery that I read. So it was a lot of fun. I really liked it.
And sorry, there's a squirrel that's probably 10 feet from me and he's staring at me. The Milne one I'm reading is in Bodies from the Library Book. It's a 5-book collection of lost detective stories. Interesting.
I wonder if it was never published then by Milne and it was found after his death. I'm not sure.
Could be. Interesting. So, Anne, I know you read a lot of mysteries. So, what is your favorite or favorites? I know, try to choose a favorite. It's kind of hard. What are your favorites, and how does this one rank in comparison?
Oof, that's tough. Well, Sherlock Holmes, Hound of the Baskervilles is one of the best mysteries, I would say. With Agatha Christie, there's so many good ones. It's hard to pick. I prefer Hercule Poirot over Miss Marple. So I would recommend Death on the Nile is one of my favorites, and Murder on the Orient Express. There's also, I can't think of the name now. One of her most famous standalones one, but that one's good too. And then with Dorothy L. Sayers, hers are more focused on the characters. So while there is mystery, it's more focused on the characters and developing their relationships with each other. And so my favorite by her is Gaudy Night. So there's a lot of good mysteries, and I'm just starting to get into the golden era of mysteries. So outside of Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, or Dorothy L. Sayers, I don't know many of them. So I would love more recommendations.
Yeah, I'd have to concur with everything you just said. I mean, this whole era is just a golden era for mysteries, and yeah, I'm really impressed with Milne. I'm kind of disappointed, I guess, that there's not more there, because I think he really could have done more with these characters. And I guess with maybe Agatha Christie and some of the other writers, you do get a little bit more character development, so there's a little bit more there for you. And I guess that would be one thing that you kind of miss from this one, just because the murders happened. You're just kind of dropped into the murder, which it kind of works because you as the reader, you're just dropped into it, just like the detective is, just like Anthony is. He's just dropped right in there. So it worked for this. But if you really like, a lot of character development, you won't really find that with this. But it's a really good, quick mystery. So I think we all, and it's good to see Lady Jane. Thanks for popping in. I think we all really enjoyed that one.
And then there were none. That was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite Agatha Christie. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that one. And it's funny because I don't reread books often, but that's one I've reread. This tells you how my memory is with mysteries. Like, I've reread it. It's like the first time all over again. Because I'm like, I should know already what's going to happen. But I guess that's good because I can reread it and still enjoy it, just as much as the first time. So,
Yeah.
and actually, Mark says he's doing a misplaced authors project. Huge number of them are forgotten mystery writers of the late 19th, early 20th century. So I'll be happy to
Yes.
send you some suggestions. Actually, Mark, can I make a suggestion, a request from a friend? Would you do a video on that?
Yes, please.
Because I would love that.
Yeah.
That would be a great, I mean, no pressure or anything. Not trying to put you on the spot, even though I kind of did. Sorry about that, Mark. But yeah, that would be a great video because I think you hear about the same stuff on a lot of booktube channels. We a lot of times read some of the same books and some of the same authors, so it's nice to kind of find some of those forgotten authors in there sometimes. See, the crowd agrees, Mark. That would be a great video. All right. Well, I think we just about covered it. So is there anything else you wanted to add, Anne?
No, I will say I have a collection of English detective novels or English detective short stories, and they have a bunch in there that I've never heard of the short stories before. And so I would love to learn about more of because with Milne, for example, I didn't even know he wrote any mysteries. You think of the big mystery writers, Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, but you don't think of there's a lot of other mysteries that maybe we haven't read here on BookTube that we need to learn about more and spread around, because I feel like there's so many good authors that have written mysteries that most people haven't heard about.
Very true. Mark says he's got a couple recommendations there and an announcement video is up already. Perfect. All right, guys. Well, thank you everyone who did this book club read with us. And thank you so much, Anne, for agreeing to co-host this month. And I'm so glad that I got you at least for 1 month next year. Really excited about that. Always lovely to chat with you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And it was a really good pick. I was happy that we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the pressure is on, when people are reading a book that you chose. I just always have this fear, which I guess it's inevitable. There will be a loser in there somewhere, which, it'll still be interesting to discuss, I guess. But, I would feel guilty if I, chose a book that people wasted time on or felt like they wasted time on. So, but yeah, thanks guys for showing up, and hopefully we will see you in the next one.
Bye.